Now let's talk about the other war, the one in Ukraine. Russia is closing in on a big prize, the city of Bakhmut. It is in the east. The battle for Bakhmut began 6 months ago. Russian forces are trying to take it, and they could be close. President Zelensky of Ukraine is worried.
Of course, I'm constantly in touch with our commanders. Special attention is paid to the situation in the east, especially in the Donetsk region. In the Bakhmut sector, the situation is constantly becoming more difficult. The enemy is constantly destroying everything that can be used to protect our positions for fortification and defense.
That doesn't inspire confidence. The commander of Ukraine's ground forces spoke out too. He says the situation in Bakhmut is quote-unquote extremely tense. In fact, tensions were high in Russia too. Flights to St. Petersburg were suddenly suspended. Russia shut down the airspace around the city. This was after reports of an unidentified drone. Meanwhile, Ukraine is receiving more visitors. Yesterday, it was the U.S. Treasury Secretary's turn. Janet Yellen. Why was she in Ukraine? To discuss the rollout of a fresh aid package. The U.S. is giving $1.25 billion in economic aid to Ukraine.
And today I'm proud to announce the transfer of an additional amount of over $1.2 billion. That's the first tranche of about $10 billion in direct budget support that the United States will provide in the coming months.
But like the past year proved, money will not be enough. It might help Ukraine continue the fight, but it will not end the war. Russia has ruled out any prospects of a truce. It wants to settle this on the battlefield. The Kremlin was referring to the Chinese peace plan. Beijing released it last week. The West has rejected it. Ukraine wants to discuss it. And now Russia has shot it down. It's a 12-point document. It calls for a ceasefire and security guarantees for Russia. This is what China has proposed, but Moscow is not interested.
Any attempts to develop plans that will contribute to bringing peace to this conflict deserve attention. We are giving the plan suggested by our Chinese friends a great deal of attention. As for the details, of course, the details should be the subject of careful analysis, taking into account the interests of all the very different parties. This is a very long and intense process. We repeat once again that, at the moment, we do not see any prerequisites for this whole story to head in the direction of peace. The special military operation continues.
The special military operation continues. With those words, the fate of China's peace plan was sealed. Neither the West nor Russia is interested, but Beijing has not stopped trying. Today, China welcomed a key ally of Putin, Alexander Lukashenko, the president of Belarus. He is on a 3-day visit to China. Xi Jinping extended a personal invitation to Lukashenko. China and Belarus are upgrading their relationship. There's a new name for it, an all-weather comprehensive strategic relationship. That's how Beijing and Minsk describe their ties now. Is this a step towards armed support for Russia? China is not revealing its cards yet, but Lukashenko has shown his hand. Just before he left for Beijing, this is what he said.
Despite
unprecedented sanctions, we produce sufficient quantities of weaponry and military material to meet the needs of the Belarusian army. This is due to the fact that all we need in terms of military hardware, we easily receive from Russia. But as far as microelectronics, optical electronics, optics, etc. are concerned, thank you to those who preserved the legacy of the Soviet Union. And therefore, together with Russia, we are capable of manufacturing any type of weapon.
Russia and Belarus can make any weapon together. That's a strong statement of support. But the timing may be a little off. Just yesterday, a Russian military plane in Belarus was targeted. It was targeted by an anti-government group. They used drones to attack the plane. Nevertheless, Lukashenko seems unaffected. Is he dropping a hint here? Was his statement a message for Beijing? Will China be willing to take that step, form an alliance with Belarus and Russia, a new axis against the West? Chinese diplomats won't share the specifics, but they continue to target the U.S.
中国在乌克兰问题上坚持客观公正立场，
China has adhered to an objective and just stance on the Ukraine issue. It has been actively committed to promoting peace talks and pushing for political settlement. Yet the United States has continued to fan the flame and fuel the fight by handing over more weaponry. It has provided Ukraine with over 32 billion US dollars in military aid, including large amounts of advanced weapons and equipment.
The United States is not stepping back either. It is maintaining pressure on Beijing. China likes to say that it's neutral. It is a neutral player in this war, but Washington disagrees. It says China is neither neutral nor an honest broker in this conflict.
We are concerned that the PRC is contemplating providing lethal assistance to Russia for Russia's use in Ukraine for a number of reasons, including for the impact it would have on the battlefield inside Ukraine, but also because the PRC has attempted to maintain this veneer of neutrality. The PRC has told the world that essentially it is not taking a position, but rather it has tried to portray itself as an honest broker. In word and in deed, however, the PRC has been anything but an honest broker.
America's attacks are unsparing. It wants to deter China from sharing arms with Russia. Moscow has decided to hit back with a new claim. The Russian Defense Ministry held a press conference today, and you have to listen to what they said. They said the US might deploy chemical weapons in Ukraine and launch a chemical attack. Moscow held a PowerPoint presentation. It said it had details about the plans, the exact dates of delivery. Russia claims to know when Ukraine will get these chemical weapons and their antidote. There was also a mention of a former American ambassador to Russia.
On February 22nd, an influential American NGO held a conference on events in Ukraine. Speaking at the event, a former US ambassador to Russia, John Sullivan, said, and I quote, "Russian troops plan to deploy chemical weapons in the area of the special military operation. We regard this information as an intention of the United States themselves and their accomplices to carry out a provocation in Ukraine using toxic chemicals."
It does sound like a serious claim, also one that's hard to verify. But one thing is quite clear. The war is taking dangerous turns. Last week, Putin escalated the nuclear threat, and now there's talk of chemical weapons. We hope this does not get out of hand. Meanwhile, the French president is planning a reset. Macron will travel to Africa this week. Yesterday, he tried to set the tone for his visit. Macron said France will cut back on its troops in Africa, and French military bases in the continent will see a change.
Basically, the logic is that our model must no longer be that of military bases as they exist today. In the future, our presence will be in bases, schools and academies that will be co-managed. They will be staffed by French personnel who will remain, albeit at lower levels, and by African personnel. And they will also be able to welcome other partners if our African partners so wish, and on their terms.
Macron is making a fresh outreach. He wants France to demonstrate what he calls profound humility, but it's easier said than done. As president, Macron will be visiting Africa for the 18th time. He plans to make 4 stops: Angola, Gabon, Republic of Congo, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The French president has promised, or had promised, a partnership of equals to Africa. But so far, he's not been able to deliver it. You see, just like the UK, France had a vast colonial empire. Nearly half of the African nations were under French influence and control. They were either colonies or protectorates. These are the former French colonies. Post-independence, France maintained some influence on them, but it's now declining. In recent years, France has been at the receiving end. It has faced sharp criticism. The anti-colonial sentiment has always been there, but recent events accelerated the trend. Consider what happened in Mali in April last year. The French military had to leave the country. What were the French forces doing there? They were fighting Islamist militants. The operation began in the year 2013. It went on for 8 years, and it ended in a rather humiliating fashion for France. The French forces became deeply unpopular. On their watch, the number of terror attacks increased steadily, and more people joined militant groups. Basically, France could not solve the problem. It may have only made it worse. So it left. Guess who replaced the French soldiers? The Wagner group from Russia. They have been tasked with fighting the militants now. And Mali is just one example. Then we have Senegal. In 2021, protests broke out in Senegal. Young people took to the streets. They smashed windows of French gas stations and set fire to French supermarkets. Why were the protesters angry? Because they believed that their president was a puppet of Macron. In the same year, a French convoy was blocked in Niger. 2 people were killed in the unrest. Last year, there was a coup in Burkina Faso. The anti-France sentiment was visible there too. Protesters tore up French flags. For President Macron, strong ties with Africa are a priority, but his Africa policy has not really worked. In fact, it has proven to be counterproductive. So perhaps for the last time, he's attempting another reset. He's taking a different approach this time. He wants to cut back on the military presence and build on the cultural ties.
Pour éviter la répétition de l'histoire, il existe une autre voie.
To avoid repeating history, there is another path, the one we've been pursuing for the past 6 years. Another path that consists in not reducing Africa to a field of competition or profits, and in considering African countries as partners with whom we have shared interests and responsibilities. We need to build a new balanced, mutual and responsible relationship.
Équilibré, réciproque et responsable.
A reasonable relationship, that's what Macron is promising, but can he really deliver it? The world is watching his next move. Meanwhile, in Nepal, things are getting out of hand. The government is falling apart. There's high political drama. The fragile coalition, barely 2 months old, has broken. None of this is new to Nepal, but that's hardly a consolation. They say politics make strange bedfellows. Nepal is a textbook example. Strange alliances have been stitched up to take power, only to be broken in a few days or weeks or months. We'll tell you about this in detail, but first let's bring you up to speed with the current crisis. At the center of the drama is this man, Kamal Dahal, also known as Prachand. He's the Prime Minister right now. He stitched a 7-party coalition to come to power, 7 parties. And that was barely 2 months ago. And now 3 of his allies have walked out of the government. This includes his largest ally, the party led by former Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli. Why did they leave? Oli's party says Prachand's behavior made it difficult for them to continue.
The Prime Minister directed the Foreign Minister to cancel her foreign trip. It did not seem appropriate to us to stay in the government after he asked to leave the government voluntarily or work as a minister without portfolio. So the party has decided to leave the government and withdraw our support.
So what really happened? You see, the election for Nepal's next president is due. It is scheduled for the 9th of March. The opposition fielded Ram Chandra Paudel as its candidate. Oli's party fielded a man called Subhash Nembang. And here's the twist. When the time to offer formal support came, Prachand picked the opposition's candidate. Basically, he ditched his own ally, KP Sharma Oli. And that has left them angry. Prachand has been accused of betraying the understanding among all his allies. But then again, why did Prachand do it? Why did he jump ship? Reports say he wanted a national consensus among all parties, a consensus to share posts like president and vice president amicably. But his idea was shot down by Oli. Now, with Prachand's latest experiment in tatters, another party is back in the game. It's called the Nepali Congress. It's the single largest party in Nepal's parliament, led by another former Prime Minister, Sher Bahadur Deuba. He is now critical to the survival of this government. Without his support, the Prime Minister will not be able to continue. And the Prime Minister will face a no-confidence vote. So that's where things stand right now, which brings us to the larger problem in Nepal's politics. It's basically a game of musical chairs and the unabashed hunger for power. A bunch of leaders take turns to lead the country. Then they fight, the government falls, the chaos continues, and the people pay the price for it. You see, Nepal has a checkered political history. Unstable government is the norm. Sample this. Since the year 2008, which is when Nepal became a republic, it has seen 11 prime ministers. In the last 8 years alone, 7 governments have changed. 7 governments in 8 years. And every change follows the same pattern. Power has been concentrated in the hands of 3 individuals. Who are these people? First is Kamal Dahal, who heads the Communist Party of Nepal, the Maoist Centre faction. He's been Prime Minister twice, and this is his 3rd stint. Then there's KP Sharma Oli. He heads the Marxist-Leninist faction of the Nepal Communist Party. He's been Prime Minister twice too. And then there's Sher Bahadur Deuba, again a two-time Prime Minister and leader of the Nepali Congress. None of them has completed a full term in power, not one Prime Minister. And that's because they're busy toppling the other person's government. Take this current government, for instance. The Nepalese general elections last year threw up a hung parliament. There was no clear winner, meaning no party had a clear majority. Prachand won 32 seats. He was reportedly in talks with Deuba's party to form a government. Deuba was all set to be the next Prime Minister of Nepal, but then Prachand dumped him at the 11th hour and he went with KP Sharma Oli to become the Prime Minister himself.
I'm feeling very happy and proud. There's a lot of responsibility and challenges. I've felt this.
Feeling happy and proud, he said. But what about the people of Nepal? What does this political drama cost them? You see, voters vote for a stable government, hoping to see stable governance in return. But if power-hungry leaders are busy breaking and making alliances, what can one expect? You may remember these visuals. They're from last month. 72 people died in Nepal's worst aviation accident in 3 decades. Reports say it was due to an engine problem, but this accident also highlighted the negligence by Nepal's political class, how lack of reform and action is killing the aviation sector, and that too in a country that depends so heavily on tourism. Which brings us to Nepal's economy, crashing like its planes. The Nepali rupee is weakening against the US dollar. Banks are struggling to recover loans. I could go on, but you get the point. Prachand may or may not survive the latest political turmoil, but power-hungry politicians are taking a toll on the country. The Prime Minister may change, the story may not. And finally, it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story. Starting with the UK, northern lights lit up the night sky in southern England. They are seen in Scotland, but rarely ever spotted in the UK's south. In Greece, people participated in a flower war. Much like the Indian festival of Holi, people had fun with colors there. In Singapore, women are ruling the male-dominated sport of wrestling. And finally, Courtney Cox, the actor who played Monica in Friends, got her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Her on-screen and off-screen best friends, Jennifer Aniston, who played Rachel, and Lisa Kudrow, who played Phoebe, were there to support her. Could there be a better end to tonight's show, we say? Leaving you with the visuals. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.